Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Immediately get the hiccups. Today is Friday, June 2nd. June 1st really snuck up on me. We've got a new event here on Yu-Gi-Oh! For a second there I thought I wasn't going to be able to load in, but mostly we're starting late just because of my crazy sleep schedule and because my fragile macro was apparently so fragile in the sense that it was relying on one function working one very specific way, and by taking that linchpin out of the mechanism, the whole system has pretty much fallen down. Now, programmers never like to really admit that when you run into trouble and bugs, there's an opportunity to write your code better, but I will break the silence there and say I have learned that there's an opportunity to write my code better, so over the weekend I will try and improve upon my code, and honestly it will work, assuming everything can be programmed to work. It'll be a much better system, a more robust system, a less fragile system. In a lot of ways, my macro is very quick and dirty because there's just a lot of opportunity for people to change their web pages, and if you change the web pages, then the program itself would probably break. See, it says we have a new selection pack here. This must be this one. And we just opened a bunch of cards, so it'd be kind of hard to justify purchasing this. This really can't be the new selection pack. If it is, then it is a weird selection pack in which I have a considerable amount of the ultra rares. But then it can't also be this one that has only 6 days. Could it? That wouldn't make much sense. I have pretty much all these cards too. So maybe 5 days, not 6. That's hard to read. Maybe this is getting replaced, and that's what they're talking about as far as a new selection pack. Which, yeah, we should have a decent amount, but not as much as I would like as far as gems there. Alright, so you have this double deck dual trial. Which apparently is going to be a deck event where if you go first, based on you play one deck, and if you go second you play a different deck, which at the moment is just not realistic. So let's instead just duel with the same deck each time. Let's see if we can get 3 wins fairly quickly and then be done with this dual trial so we can focus more on playing ranked and improving my meta deck instead. For the accountability section today, I am still playing Indiana Jones and Emperor's Tomb. I do think I'm pot committed enough into it. I've put enough hours into it now that I will see it all the way through to the end. But there is, as a second generation adventure platformer Tomb Raider ripoff, there's a lot of lack of variety of gameplay in it. You very consistently are bouncing between, you'll go through one area to platform from point A to point B, then you'll walk through a door, and then there'll be a couple of Nazis. They are now full-on Nazis wearing swastika armbands in Emperor's Tomb, even though you have to play 3 or 4 hours before you get to that point. So they really hide it, which is probably not a smart move. But yeah, you'll run into 2 or 3 people, and then you'll just gun down those people, and then you'll walk to the next room, and then you'll do platforming, then you'll run into 2 or 3 more people and gun them down. You're always very low on bullets, and so you do end up having to kind of optimize and punch people as soon as they drop a gun. Like once you're safe enough that all they can do is punch you, you can just punch them, and it seems like you punch a lot harder, or you take a punch a lot better. There was one section in the previous level to the one I'm playing, which is Istanbul, where enemies infinitely spawned, and that was weird. There was one puzzle section in the previous level too. But for the most part, it does just kind of seem like they're going to be very... So if I was going to use crossout designator, I would have to name a card that was actually in my decks. The Dreaming Town. Like, because you can't just do this. No. It gives you a list of cards in your deck. It's funny, crossout designator might have worked better in a version of this deck that it originally stood in. Yeah, I probably should get rid of crossout designator as a card. It probably isn't going to work. Other than playing Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, I basically am just watched a little bit of TV, but I really didn't do too much of that either. Like, mostly just leaning on playing on my phone or playing podcasts. I watched a lot of the Taskmaster new season, just wrapped up. And they just announced the next season, season 16, or series 16 as they call it. But yeah, it definitely feels like I mostly just slept over the past 2 days. I know I didn't. I actually put a ton of time into playing Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. It is a real time suck of a game for as little as you actually do or interact with it. It still has major problems where if you were to just take the same narrative idea story and make a point-and-click adventure like Fate of Atlantis, you would have had a much better experience, because then Indiana Jones would have a companion character that he would talk to and interact with. There would just be more dialogue, and inherently that is the push, I guess, of 3D adventure platforming games and 3D first-person shooter games, is that there's a almost blatant admittance by game developers in the early 2000s and the 90s, particularly on PC, where they just admit that they don't have the talent that is necessary to write good stories, and they push effectively the video game world away from being a I don't know which one of these I should actually use. Let's bring out the 10-star, since I think that's the only way that one would ever activate. And then we'll take... Nope, we're not doing that. But yeah. And we've never really recovered from that either. There's just been an increasing divide between first-person shooters that maybe have better stories than a lot of the bad games from the 90s, but relatively speaking are in a very poor level of quality compared to where they really should be. And then you have some very few numbers of games that do try to have a somewhat deep story, and they either show up as visual novels that barely have any gameplay in them, or you have a rare standout in something like maybe BioShock, which, if anything, BioShock arguably hurts its narrative and story in a lot of places with very generic fighting gameplay sequences. The Big Daddy fights are pretty good overall, but there definitely could have been 10% less fighting in BioShock. That the boss fight at the very end of BioShock 1, for instance, that's probably the best example of just this is what video games became in the minds of most game developers. It's almost as if the Rydo strike, and I don't know if maybe this was some kind of subconscious influence that happened amongst the managers and the developers and publishers of video games, is that the TV writer strike, the big one that happened that canceled Heroes and ruined Lost and all those deep narrative TV shows, I wonder if that influenced how video games were developed going forward, in that there was less and less of an emphasis on hiring writers. On a certain level, I don't know if I can really blame them that much, because you have Elden Ring, a massive success that was sold as being written by George R.R. Martin, and honestly, I feel like the story and narrative around Elden Ring is completely ignored these days. The audience has been trained to not really care about story. I did hear somebody say something interesting, in that a gamer has said on some podcast, some podcaster said that they could never go back and play The Last of Us again because the HBO Last of Us TV show did the story and narrative so much better. So they've effectively stolen the identity of that video game. And The Last of Us was definitely hailed as one of the best stories in most recent history around video games. So yeah, it's no surprise that instead of having a bunch of Indiana Jones games that either would have gone further into the era of Uncharted games and then even perhaps into the era of the rebooted Tomb Raider games. They just gave up after the Emperor's Tomb. I imagine Steven Spielberg needed to be involved and wasn't very interested in being involved in more Indiana Jones games. There's a danger of having like 10, 12 Indiana Jones video games and only 3 at the time Indiana Jones movies. And without Steven Spielberg kind of pinning and writing these stories, I imagine that it would be very repetitive. That is something that definitely needs to be pointed out, is that the Emperor's Tomb is clearly and very blatantly stealing concepts from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It is so incredibly obvious that you have a entire level in a German style castle, and you're coming in and out of the castle and sneaking around, and there's tapestries all around the wall. Everything that would just be the greatest hits of what you would remember from that movie, except for the part where there was actually characters in the level. I still have yet to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing here. Yeah, just the appearance that I'm doing something seems to scare away a lot of people with a tier limits deck. Which that may be the only way I actually win with this deck. Alright, well, since we started late, we don't want to go too long. Let's see what the big news is that I want to mention. It's probably not super video game related, but Reddit does seem to be potentially the next victim of their own lack of success and yet being popular. Lack of success effectively being what people would claim. Investors would claim this is just not successful enough. Target 1 spell in the field, or you can target 2 if you control Beasts of Starfrost, shuffle them into your deck, then send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. Like, this entire deck is built around sending things to the graveyard. I don't know why this trap, I guess, allows me to then select something like this. Although that's just the same thing I already had. So I could get to 2,500 with the XYZ summon. Probably should have done that. But yeah, there is now potentially a push for leaving Reddit. Reddit is kind of unique in what it is, in that it's more of a forum with social credits. Although inherently I think there's a lot of problems with Reddit that most people would probably want to get rid of in a new site as a competitor. The fact that there's just a lot of gold farming or credit farming, thumbs up farming, karma, that's what they call it, karma farming on Reddit. There's a lot of forums that are just run by unpaid moderators who run them as their own little kingdoms and fiefdoms. And as a site, it has to be kind of heavily curated. You can't just really look at the front page and get the best of experiences. You have to find the subreddits that you like and just say, well, this little subreddit here is well maintained and has a decent moderator, and this is talking about the things I really want to know. But yeah, this is all mostly coming about them basically trying to charge a ridiculous amount of money for API access for other apps. And much like TweetDeck and the Twitter apps, I think a significant number of people really do use some kind of app. Yeah, so I was never really getting a lot of video game news from Reddit anyways, because the r/video games is too busy and too much of a mess really as a source, or even r/quality gaming content seemed like it might be a little bit more better content, but still really too busy for its own good. It's a shame that we still are at a situation where mainstream news media is necessary to, or seems necessary to, filter out what otherwise is just a deluge of news that you would see on Reddit. Because in an ideal world, I would stop looking at Video Games Chronicle and Gematsu and GameDeveloper.com, and I would get all of my news from random posts on Reddit. But also that leads to a lot of untrue, trustworthy, slightly inaccurate news, even more than what you get from just mainstream video game journalists who aren't very good at their jobs either. Platinum Games has their third episode of the Bayonetta 3 developer diary, so I guess they are doing a minimal effort there, I would say, to really have a more advertising for Bayonetta 3. I would assume most people at this point who would play Bayonetta 3 are aware of Bayonetta 3 and will have either played it or will get around to it eventually. Bayonetta 3 I don't believe is on PC, so the big push and big announcement certainly would be around that. Let's see what happens here. This is slow. I think if I'm going to play a deck like this, I really need better cards that activate and synergize when thrown into the graveyard. The 8-bit though arcade stick for Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, and Windows 10, arcade fight stick with a 3.5mm audio jack is officially licensed by Xbox, and so they were promoting it. I kind of wish this had existed a few years ago, where I built one probably pretty poorly. Had a table, drilled some holes. The table was incredibly cheap to build a fight stick, where you can get empty enclosures, I learned after the fact, to build your own, and you still may very well want to do that. There is not, I imagine, too much of a difference here around this. You might get some particularly good weight. It looks like there's a wireless receiver that may come with it. You have some button switchers here. Now, most official fighting sticks you would want a lockout for the start and pause games, because that's an immediate disqualification if you accidentally hit like start, pause, menu, things like that. They are showing you the inside here if you wanted to mod it, and this is the part that definitely would catch my attention, is that you have this fairly large circuit board taking up a decent amount of space at the top, and then you have a single pin connector going to something here, which that might be to an audio jack here. Then it seems like there's a color guide if you wanted to swap out the buttons, because inherently, yeah, this, you may very quickly want to switch out the buttons for different colors or better styles. This looks like this is a closer to an 8-way rounded restrictor on it. So if you're going to try and do like a 4-way game, old arcade game, that's not really what it's designed for. Or even a 8-way lock restrictor. That's what this clear plastic piece on the top is. Looks like you might be able to change that, as you can in most arcade sticks, fairly easily. Noticeably here though, it doesn't really look that heavy, but there may just be a metal base plate on the other side that adds its weight, and you do want a decent amount of weight. You don't want it sliding as you're furiously pressing the buttons. It may not be, you know, as big as I might want it. The control stick may be a little too close to the buttons, and even the buttons themselves might be a little closer than what you would expect as a standard layout. But definitely you can see there's no real room to throw in a Raspberry Pi 4B Plus in there. You would think that maybe around this section there might be an opportunity for that. But yeah, I don't know. This may be the lockout switch here. Otherwise, it doesn't have one. It's labeled with the Xbox buttons also. So, yeah. Where you would think there would be room for a Raspberry Pi is the circuit board. So then you would potentially try to squeeze one down there. And that just doesn't feel like there's enough room. It is $120, which is arguably a fine price, but maybe not the best price ever. No, I don't think I do see anything here that would be a lockout for a pause and start in upload buttons. But I guess they are kind of out of the way too. 8-bit though in general makes decent products. They're not particularly the cheapest. It also comes in black, which I would heavily recommend getting the black one over the white one, just because that is going to show off fingerprints a lot less, and dirt and grime a lot less. But I would certainly have to say, if you were thinking about this, while you may get a little bit better quality because of 8-bit though behind it, there is probably a slightly cheaper way to build your own. The thing I guess that you mostly would get here is you're getting a molded plastic thing where you would probably get some kind of acrylic box or have to build something out of wood or metal otherwise, and the price could just go up and up, but then it depends heavily on your what level of quality you would really want to at that point. Like, let's go ahead and activate that. You have to also be very, very much into fighting games. Otherwise, you're gonna waste your money on a fighting stick. I look over at my 2-player at Games Legend with pinball buttons on the sides that has just been sitting on a table, and I've just done nothing with it. And it's really a shame. A big part of that, though, is not fully my fault, because what I wanted to do with it was to hook up a Raspberry Pi to it, and there's not been any Raspberry Pis available. But yeah, if you got, in comparison, the 1-player Act Legends, yeah, we should just bring that up. So I'm going to quickly point out that apparently the CWA has rescinded 3 unfair labor practices charges against Activision Blizzard. The labor union also slammed recent comments made by Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick, which maybe that is more around GameDeveloper.com not wanting to give even a full win to Activision Blizzard. They rescinded 3 of their charges filed against it. Charges, I guess, to the labor board because the publisher agreed to post a company-wide notice informing workers of their unionization rights, and rescinded disciplinary action that was taken against 1 employee. So the union effectively bullied them into making a minimal notification and rescind disciplinary action that they probably shouldn't have done in the first place against a probably high in the union or union leader, union member. Let's see. If we can find this fight stick. I actually have to play too. I have no idea why I'm really playing with Cyberstein here. Sounds like that is just a crazy idea. We'll pull this one out and see if that plays any better. The problem with Cyberstein is that you have a 4,000 here. It obviously will let me just lose completely if this guy just attacks this guy. If I had some way of making him go in a defense position, that might be something. But I can't. So I would need some kind of trick. And the trick was on me. So this guy played better than me. No big surprise there. Okay, so here's the Legends Gamer Pro being priced at $250. I hope I didn't pay $250 for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was closer to $100 that was spent on it. Which, even at $200, you're getting this mouse ball in the middle, and you're getting 2 characters, and you're getting the pinball, so you are getting more from that. But that wasn't the one I was really looking for. I was looking for, let's see, this is, let's just go to all products here. Sorry, this page is restricted. Seriously. Arcade and consoles. Like, at Legends in general, more known for making these kind of overpriced things. Legends Gamer Mini here. That's the one I was looking for. And it's important to point out that the Legends Gamer Mini here for $130 is coming with a puck that comes with games and is effectively a mini console of old games. I'm just opening a bunch of new tabs here. So compared to the Xbox controller, you have a kid playing here, so it looks a little bit wider than it actually is, but I think you probably do have a lot more space. You have a very big open base here. If this is like the one I have, it is a wireless controller, whereas, well, I guess the Xbox one was wireless too. But yeah, the only real difference here is you don't have the labeling of Xbox buttons on it. And are any of these pictures going to load? But yeah, I would severely recommend getting this as a starting point if you wanted a fight stick. But if you want a professional fight stick, you wouldn't get either one of them, because this is just as expensive, or maybe it's like $10 more, but then you get a whole console built into it, and you have, maybe you're missing a couple of buttons that couldn't be remapped. There may not be a share button, for instance, or the player 1, player 2 buttons might be a little difficult to remap, but you get the right kind of layout that you probably want, and you get an 8-way stick. I'm not sure if they point that out. But yeah, by far I would recommend this fight stick, particularly if you could get this used, or at, like, the best case scenario would be if you were going around a, like, Goodwill, a place where things get donated when kids are no longer interested. If you found one of those, you could probably get a decent deal that way, or if somebody gifted it, passed it down, handed it down. That being said, you run into problems where a Legends Ultimate Mini arcade game for $500 is just too expensive, and the Ultimate alone for $600 maybe makes some sense, but I don't know, like $800 for a pinball table that's still not really to the appropriate scale is probably too much. And yeah, $250 for this is too much. And then $500 for this is too much. If each of these were on sale by a couple $100s, that they become really good deals at that point. But only when they're on sale. Right. It seems like it's way too late to be announcing this, but Nintendo has revealed new pastel colored Joy-Con sets. They will launch this month. Since this is Pride Month, I guess it is just called Pride now. It's probably insulting to say Gay Pride. That there is a massive amount of people whoever is still left on Twitter, a lot of video game companies who put out on day one a Pride post. I'm not going to go over it because I mean it's all of it is just advertising and lip service. But it does seem like specifically people have been moved to move on the first day. They don't want even a single day to pass them by to make them seem like they are not advertising for Pride. Which there's a very decent argument that companies should not advertise around any kind of celebrations or celebrations of anything. Like, it would make a lot of sense for companies to not celebrate Pride because they also don't celebrate Christmas or Yom Kippur or any of the more religious based holidays. They celebrate Christmas only because Christmas has been perverted into consumerism, and they celebrate Thanksgiving only because it makes Black Friday and sells, and they probably shouldn't do any of that anyways. I'd like to see companies be a lot quieter, even on like online things where it's very easy to put out a tweet of support. But generally speaking, people don't want to hear from companies unless we just want to hear, hey, is there a sale going on? Do you have a new product that I might be interested in? Is there a recall going on? That's the three things I want from any random company anywhere. If you're going above that, you're probably buying into the idea of advertising and just trying to be in the subconscious mind of consumers, and particularly in video game companies. I just don't see the benefit in that. If it was Coca-Cola and there was a Coca-Cola available for purchase within every square meter in the Western world, then yes, being in the subconscious mind of people makes some sense if you're constantly getting offered Coca-Colas to drink. But if you made Horizon Forbidden West is available digitally at the storefronts, but you're not going to randomly walk up to a vending machine and be offered Horizon Forbidden West. So you don't really need to be in the mindset or the mind of the players that much. And if anything, it's probably led to a lot of the negativity around a lot of games too, is that you get reminded that these games exist, and then that just reminds people to criticize them. Whereas a game like Balan Wonderworld, or even the Golem game that just came out, it's going to just fade from memory very quickly, and then people will stop complaining about it because people will forget it even exists. Moving on, there's a GameDeveloper.com saying that a report claims that EA is cutting the jobs and canceling games at the Australian studio Fire Monkeys. EA intends to turn Fire Monkeys into a mono-title studio focused solely on The Sims free play, which it sucks in a lot of ways there if this is true. It's being reported by Kotaku Australia. Up to 2/3 of the staff may be getting laid off, and the rest of the staff is being told, we do not value your creative input at all, and we're just keeping you around to be a support team for The Sims free play, and as soon as we see on an accounting line that The Sims free play is not profitable, we're going to just shut down The Sims free play and fire the rest of you. I never found it tolerable. I won't even say enjoyable. I will say I did not find it tolerable when I was working other jobs that boiled down to a repetitive thing that you were just going to do every single day, and there was no hope of doing anything different or improving even the way you do things. And the sad thing there is that is probably the majority of jobs. That if you're a checkout cashier at a grocery store, your job is to stand there, I don't know why it's to stand, for 8 hours or more checking out people. You're never going to have much of a hope to do anything other than checking out people. Now, in some companies, they'll promise that eventually you'll become a manager, or eventually you'll work in the back and do stocking, or you might move around a little bit, but there's, even in that scenario, not a lot of hope that actually would happen. People in general want to be creative, and they want to have a creative output in their career as much as in their personal life, and yet managers and jobs are created around exclusive needs, individualized needs for one thing. So if you need a checkout person, you create a job and make a job description for a checkout person, and that's all you want them to do, and you'll fire anybody who does anything else because you want complete and total control of that person also. So it just creates a lot of monotony, and nobody really creates jobs to give people real chances to do something different, or even really give them hope. Inherently, it is more of a case that people create jobs when they absolutely had to create a job, and then the managers regret creating that job for the rest of their life and try to make the job as miserable as possible so the person will quit. The whole system, as far as employment and working jobs, is really just counter logical and a mess. Which, yeah, you throw in universal basic income into the mix, and then you make a major game changer there. I won't go into a huge UBI rant, but yeah, if all of a sudden people are working jobs not because they really need money, but because they're bored and they just want to do something, or they want to possibly earn a little bit of extra money, but they're not dependent on the job, their health care is not tied to it, and their livelihood isn't really tied to it, then jobs would probably have to evolve into a very different type of experience. What is most weird, I would say, about Fire Monkey situation is, if it is true, is that the video game industry, sorry, I'm going quiet. I've noticed I've done that a lot more, and I guess I prefer going quiet than saying and on, but it does definitely feel like I'm just getting distracted. Honestly, I feel like just the summer does something to me. It's a reverse seasonal affected disorder or something where I think I'm just a little bit less winded, or I'm more winded, I guess. I still have like no idea what card crossout designator would even. I guess that kind of works. I can definitely see how ordering the cards back on your deck might be helpful. Well, anyways, yeah, that really sucks for Fire Monkeys, and honestly, I would say it probably sucks more for the people who are still going to be working there and dependent on that job than the people who potentially could take some severance and go form their own company if they can afford it, or go work for somebody else. Although I don't know how much opportunity really exists in Australia, since we know the Australian government is extremely conservative, particularly around video games. That I wouldn't expect there to be more than 2 or 3 video game companies in the entirety of Australia, which is not a lot of opportunity. The problem I feel that's happening right now is I'm just not learning this deck fast enough. I'm not learning the new cards fast enough. So I feel like I may give it a week and just go back to Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Because I just don't have the energy to play hundreds of games to try and figure out what each card does and how it synergizes. I basically don't like when people get on the chat and backseat drive ever, but this probably would be the case where I would have to admit my ignorance and see if somebody who knew this tier limits deck better got on the chat and backseat drove me as far as rebuilding the deck, because clearly there's room for improvement there. The Sonic co-creator Yuji Naka is facing over 2 years in prison for insider trading. So, yeah. 2 years in a Japanese prison is a different experience, certainly, than 2 years in a United States prison, but I'm not sure which one would be better. Probably the Japanese prison. Alright, so let's just switch to Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Square Enix apparently is working on nailing down the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth release date. They've provided development and release date update to say basically nothing there. Let's see. YouTube advertisers is talking about how AI will revolutionize marketing, and they're hoping the product designed to increase ad performance, enable inspiring, creative, and protect people from ad fraud. So yeah, obviously everybody at Alphabet/Google was told to start talking about AI from somebody high up, but in general they are everybody is talking about AI. Here we can see a retweet here of a story how Disney and YouTube are experimenting with AI in video advertising. They also have an article here that says Shorts is expanding into awareness campaigns, giving brands more ways to become discovered. And this is a Deadline article. So yeah, they are definitely pushing towards the idea that YouTube Shorts will now have even more ads in them than what they may have had before. Who is activating what here? Let's see. I think probably on the tier limits it would make a lot of sense to have Lightning Storm. I think that's a decent card. Then this. This. Attached to that. Is this guy gonna just concede? The real move, I suppose, would be to just summon one card here, like this, and not go through the rest of the rigmarole, and then go into a battle. GameDeveloper.com has this article that says Stranger Things game developer Bonus XP is going to close down. This was the studio behind some of Netflix's first foray into gameplays, including this Stranger Things game, which first game was Stranger Things 1984, was a free mobile game. Did they make anything else worth mentioning? They also, in 2019, released Stranger Things 3, the game. It just wrecked me there. Okay, in the turn. So, you definitely may have a little bit more of a challenge archiving or playing these Stranger Things games in the future if the companies are being shut down, and if these games were only available through Netflix's own service. The mediocre news there is that Stranger Things video games never were that popular that you would say it's a huge loss to the gaming world to lose those games, but it's still a loss. In a lot of ways, I just don't expect or want Netflix to be good at making video games, because I want them to focus on being better at making TV and movies. But clearly they are pushing into the foray of video games. I don't know if they're really pushing towards enough quality there. We will see with the new companies and the bigger, more ambitious maneuvers. Right. So, I'm gonna go ahead and summon this. Gonna go ahead and activate this. Then I'm going to go ahead and summon this. There's half of his life gone. But then maybe this guy will give me a card back. I feel like I am gonna just have to play off screen here just to get this side quest going. This 2-duel trial deck. You can definitely feel though, and this is in part I'm sure because I actually just understand better how to play this deck, but it definitely seems like there's a lot more counters. I guess we'll end there. Meta had some small announcement, I guess I'd call it small, for a brand new Quest 3 headset that will cost $4.99 and launch this fall. It's seemingly, I think, has better outside cameras so you can actually see the world outside you a little bit better. $4.99 is very expensive as a virtual reality, mixed reality headset, and it is still pushing you towards the meta virtual reality, meta reality technology is what they're calling it. This looks like this is an infrared dot matrix projector or something, and that these look like these are cameras either designed to receive a LiDAR style signal or look outside in the real world with actual just visuals. I feel like the MetaQuest 2 only had a black and white camera for some reason, and then this one has color cameras, which it doesn't really make a lot of sense that it wouldn't by default just be black and white. I mean, by default be color. if he can't negate the summoning of this guy, I'm just going to banish his character. I still very much have no faith in VR technologies, augmented reality technologies. These headsets are just getting as big, if not bigger, than what they were before. They aren't just contact lenses or something, some small pair of glasses. Well, we cleared the field, and potentially he's going to resummon something back from the banished pile, which Yu-Gi-Oh! Really has ruined the idea of something being banished, because banished cards are not so much banished. The biggest surprise announcement around the Quest 2, Quest 3, and PC VR in this case was a 7th Guest VR due out in 2023. This is not just a remake or remaster of the 7th Guest. It is a full-on, well, I guess it's not a remaster, it's a remake. It is a full-on changing of things, which, in all fairness, having played the 7th Guest relatively recently, it can stand for some improvements, certainly. There's perhaps not enough puzzles, and the puzzles are perhaps a little too not complicated, but poorly designed. Now, the problem I mostly see with this, unfortunately, is that you are in VR. So, in the 7th Guest, you just walk through, and you're just in the house to start with. Here, they're showing that you scroll upward, and you have this kind of lantern, and that the house is weirdly on an island. And there's a whole find a gem and unlock a gate and walk up towards this. It all feels a lot more like the lighthouse in BioShock than it does the mansion in the 7th Guest. The actors, I assume, might be brand new actors playing the roles, but they're being scanned with this like volumetric technology. That's a puzzle that's new. That's a puzzle that's new. Now, it's worth also mentioning that the 13th doll, I believe, was the fan-made, somewhat semi-in-canon sequel to the 7th Guest, or the 11th Hour. I don't remember which one. But, yeah. I think it may be that the 11th Hour is kind of a spiritual successor to the 7th Guest, and then there may have been a 12th game, something with the number 12 in it, and then there is a spiritual successor to the 11th Hour and that 12th game if it exists in the 13th doll. Which, let's actually just see if we can find that game. 13th doll. Doing a lot of Googling. So yeah, you have this 13th doll in a fan game of the 7th Guest, which these are much more in line with the puzzles that were in the Seventh Guest. This came out in 2019. And in this case, it's just kind of live action footage with a little ghostly apparition through it. So, and you can see this is very positive, but it's arguably not that relevant in that there's really only 100 reviews. So clearly they didn't have the promotion budget that this Seventh Guest VR does. I will say, I suspect that the people who own the Seventh Guest at this point are not the same people that originally made the Seventh Guest. So this is definitely more of a cash-in as far as the VR game, in an attempt to cash in on a recognizable name, which at a certain level, yeah, the Seventh Guest is more of a recognizable name than it is a property that you can easily remake and resell as is. So I don't think they're doing the wrong thing by fairly drastically changing what the experience might be by changing puzzles and changing visuals. So I hope it succeeds, but I mostly hope that it comes away from VR at some point. But also, I'm really hating on the idea that they're making VR games and then I have to wait for potentially 6 months to 4 or 5 years to find out if, and it is a big if, they will ever bother to remove the VR elements and sell the game in a non-VR form. This needs to be really my last game. Let's see. Just let him sweep on that. So we had talked about in the past how there was this report and it was maybe true, maybe not true. It seems like it's increasingly being proved out that people believe it is true, that Valve literally assisted Nintendo in a cease and desist citing the DMCA. They're still getting it wrong from what I've heard at GameDeveloper.com. Emails between Nintendo and America and Valve showed that the latter, Valve, developer had an active hand in it getting the emulator pulled from the storefront. So, yeah. Absolute sabotage. And arguably, this is a problem of one storefront being the de facto monopoly as far as where PC software and PC games are purchased. But it in particular in this case is really just an example of Valve being run by crazy people. These emails were allegedly obtained by The Verge, shows that Valve played a direct hand in the strike against the emulator. In the email sent on Valve on May 26, a lawyer for Nintendo of America thanked the developer for informing Nintendo of America of Dolphin's existence. The same lawyer wrote that the Dolphins unlawfully circumvents a technological manner that effectively controls access. So, yeah. I wonder if this is a Valve employee trying to get a job at Nintendo, or trying to get some kind of reward from Nintendo. Like, because you effectively hurt your business partner. This is literally tortious interference of a contract potentially happening here, in that Valve is actively trying to interfere with the contract of Valve themselves by contacting Nintendo and getting them to send a cease and desist. Let's see. Valve's Casey Atchison Boyle later confirmed that the developers and the involvement in the matter. She told The Verge that it brought Dolphin to the attention, proactively giving Nintendo history of taking action against some emulators, and if that wasn't enough, Valve further told The Verge it operates Steam as an open platform, but it relies on creators shipping only things they have the legal rights to distribute. We do not want to ship an application we know could be taken down. Sorry, gotta play. We do not want to ship an application we know could be taken down because that can be disruptive to Steam users. Based on the letter we received, Nintendo and the Dolphin team have a clear legal dispute between them, and Valve can't sit in judgment. Even with this additional information, the question worth asking is why or how Valve allowed Dolphin to be submitted and approved for its storefront in the first place, which is definitely a good question to ask. Like, clearly this is some kind of Game of Thrones backstabbing, where one employee or one group of employees did approve Dolphin to be on the storefront, and then another employee or group of employees is trying to screw over that other employee. It's clearly some kind of dog-eat-dog nonsense. And Dolphin and Nintendo are effectively just being used as pawns in that internal struggle. Obviously, this situation, which The Verge is now kind of backing up, highlights just the absolute worst way to do this. Once you said yes, you have to just commit to saying yes. And perhaps that's a good lesson for parents, but it's also a good lesson for businesses. Once you say yes, you've made the promise. You have to keep your promises. There's just no way to wiggle out of that. So Valve should have just let Dolphin be put up and then let Nintendo do whatever Nintendo's going to do with the DMCA, and then put all the blame on Nintendo and say, well, we have to follow the DMCA takedown request we received, so it's not our fault, we tried. But to actively sabotage the launch, I mean, that's really crazy. If I was Dolphin and I had the money, or even if I didn't have the money, as an organization, Dolphin should be running up some kind of legal defense fund, not only to proactively sue Nintendo or defend against a Nintendo lawsuit that seems to potentially be incoming, but to sue Valve now for if not tortious interference with contract, definitely not staying within the bounds of fair and good faith. There is a legal precedent that when you have a contract, and I think listing your game on Steam definitely would be considered a contract, the other person can't then go sabotage it. You say, think about the movie, is it Brewster's Millions, where the guy has to lose $1 million and have nothing to his name in 30 days, and then he gets like $1 billion. In that case, of whatever the name of that movie is, the lawyers who are involved in that actively sabotaged and acted in bad faith. That would be a great example of not sticking to the general concept of good faith dealing and not interfering with a contract. So they definitely have a lawsuit. You can't ever say they would win, but they definitely have a lawsuit against Valve for this. And Valve has opened themselves up to a major lawsuit in general. And the only one that potentially benefits here is that Nintendo may send out a cease and desist and then not actually pursue any actual legal activity against Dolphin, which would weirdly have Dolphin available for download everywhere else, but just keep it off Steam, which is very possibly what Nintendo wants to just do. Is they don't want to spend the money on the lawsuit, they just want to not allow Dolphin to be on Steam. They want to apply censorship instead of just a total outright ban. GameDeveloper.com also has this article around how the Russian invasion from Ukraine is affecting developers like Frogwares. I imagine that might be an interesting read if you're interested. At the end of the day, it is not going to change much as far as a game developer, as far as the game player's opinion or anything. Either the game is going to be games from Frogwares are either going to be made or they aren't, and they kind of obviously should. They should probably just move. This guy, Sal Romano, is the guy who runs Gematsu. He's an Italian guy in New York who runs the most Japanese English-speaking website that I've ever found. He is asking for all the PR folks to give him as much information for the upcoming chaos of Summer Games news. So yeah, he's like actively looking for more news because he expects it to be, I guess, a very, very big summer as far as announcements. I'm not sure if I 100% would be sure that's going to be the case, but yeah, we may run into a lot of news. CD Projekt is laying off the Gwent developers as it prepares to end active support for Gwent. We're transferring some of our team members to other projects, but we have to part ways with some. Hey, that is a very generous way to describe laying off people. Gwent, ultimately a failure in my book as a CCG, in that most CCGs have at least a solo player mode that you can reasonably go back and play even if the community fully dries up. And I'd say the vast majority of CCGs have enough of an audience that you can just let them run forever. And CCGs in particular, whether it's Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, the trading card game, or Yu-Gi-Oh, all of those games have very long running fandoms, so the games that support them tend to stay around forever. And then the Mario movie is now the second biggest animated film at the box office. It has beaten Frozen 1, leaving only Frozen 2 as the number one biggest box office seller. This is I don't know if this is adjusted for inflation, though, because if it was adjusted for inflation, um, then the numbers would be fairly accurate. If it isn't adjusted for inflation, then Super Mario Brothers movie is already number one, because the dollar in 2019 would have been more valuable than the dollar in 2023. Looking at this list, though, in particular, and they're just getting it from thenumbers.com, I guess is the source, it really just highlights that there is not enough good kids movies out there. Frozen is good, Frozen 2 is good. I'm not going to complain about the quality of any of these movies, but it definitely feels like there should be more variety, and they shouldn't all just be Pixar movies or Disney movies, which, particularly since we know Pixar is now owned by Disney. Speaking of animation, this isn't video game related, but I found out that the Max Fleischmann, I believe is what he's called, 1945 Superman cartoons fell out into the public domain. Probably a long time ago they fell into the public domain. And there is a version of them called the mild-mannered edition on YouTube that you can watch that is a fan edit to improve the videos, just get rid of grain and audio mistakes, because Warner Brothers, even though they don't have the rights to these 1945 Superman movies, although almost certainly they probably claim they do, because they're in public domain. Anybody, including Warner Brothers, then since they're in public domain, do have the legal right to make a collection and put it on DVD, and they've done it several times. They put it on like Laserdisc, Beta, VHS. Several other companies have done VHS and Beta and Laserdisc also, DVD and Blu-ray, and their most recently was a 4K high definition rescan of the film prints, which Warner Brothers, I guess, physically owns the film prints of these 1945 Superman cartoons, of which there's only 17 of them. But what they did in the most recent case was put very little effort into it. There's apparently a Warner Brothers Archives division that does really good rescans and 4K rescans of the film, of some of the Warner Brothers material, and then there's a Warner Brothers Home Movies, and they seem to be consistently terrible at it. And so they ran just generic digital noise reduction over the film prints, which seems like that was not necessary in that case and made it worse. And then it sounds like they ran generic like color correction on the scans, which didn't always work either. And so there are definitely some people taking it seriously, and the recommendation is to just watch the mild-mannered editions on YouTube if you want to see them. Of course, from 1945, that would be a big blast from the past. This would be the cartoon that introduced Superman being able to actually fly, instead of just leaping over buildings over and over again. And this would have been more focused and inspired by the Superman comic strip than the Action Comics comic book. There is direct inspiration from the Superman 1945 cartoons to Batman the Animated Series, which there is also a hope at some point that they would rescan those film prints and do a good job on that. It all, of course, severely depends on how much you want to fall back into nostalgia. So I basically had to hand run my macro today, so it's going to be a little bit rough. Let's go through the video games chronicle articles. We had already talked about this one, that one, that one. EA Sports has partnered with Nike's new NFT platform, Virtual Creations from Nike Swoosh. Web3 platform will be integrated into EA titles. So we have some remnants of people still talking about NFTs in Web3. Although, in this case, as stupid as NFTs sound, you do have to admit that sneaker culture is also as dumb as NFTs. So it really may be just a match made in heaven that you buy a 400 pair of Nike shoes and you get a NFT with that for free, and that NFT then integrates into an NBA basketball game where that 400 pair of Nike shoes shows up on your favorite player in the virtual basketball game. That's not that crazy. It does open up a big copyright licensing nightmare where no longer will it be settled logic that you could just put a generic shoe on characters that look like a Nike. Now anything that even looks like a Nike may want a licensing fee for. And of course this whole concept really should just fall apart because nobody should engage with it. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if people do engage with it, sneaker culture people in general. And if you are in the sneaker culture and you're buying sneakers and keeping them in the box and never wearing them, having a NFT, assuming the NFT comes free with the purchase of the expensive shoes, to actually see the shoes in use would be a nice little bonus. Does it really need to be an NFT at that point? No. It could just be a skin. It could be everybody who buys that one shoe gets that one skin. It doesn't have to be uniquely owned by one person, and the idea of it being something you could trade and sell is still ridiculous. So I would assume there's going to be some way through an EA Sports NBA type game to actually sell your NFTs or trade them, and that's just going to lead to yet another currency, yet another marketplace in a game that doesn't need more currencies and more marketplaces. Let's see, a Ubisoft Forward trailer teasers a mystery game for this month's showcase, which is pretty much just an announcement for an announcement at that point. The Epic Games Store latest free game is Midnight Ghost Hunt. Never heard of that one. Nintendo has announced Everybody 1-2 Switch, and it's releasing this month. This party game sequel can be played with the Joy-Con controllers and smart devices. So you can see everybody on the side here has a cell phone, and everybody over here has a Joy-Con in their hands. There is, though, a question about how many people can actually play in any one of those mini games, because this would imply to me at least 5 people can play at the same time, if not 10. Although 11, I guess. There's 5 people on this side, 5 people on this side, yeah. 10, probably. And I question that. I really question whether you could make a lot of games where 10 people are playing all at the same time or taking turns. I also heavily suspect that this is Nintendo clearing the board and clearing the schedule. They're getting everything that they want out for the Switch out now because they're about to announce a new console. And in particular, if that is the case, that they're clearing the board and clearing the schedule, then that might be an indication that the new console won't support Joy-Con and Joy-Con games at all. Which, okay, it kind of would be alright if they got rid of the Joy-Cons. If all of a sudden you don't have these tiny things that are difficult to maintain and you don't have that Joy-Con drift issue because you just have a better controller and a bigger controller, I think more people would be happy with no Joy-Con drift because there are no Joy-Cons than people would be upset that you can't take the Joy-Cons off and play in 1-2 Switch minigames. Yeah. It'd be kind of weird though that you couldn't connect Joy-Cons from the Switch wirelessly to a new console, but who knows what they're doing. They may come out with a new console with a completely different controller lineup that might be very crazy. I'm kind of willing to experiment with controllers anyways. We need a better system. Like, there's too many buttons on your standard controller these days, and yet we need even more input devices. So we got to figure out something else. I've always felt like we need something like a mouse wheel to select weapons with, or we need 9 buttons on the side like you might have on a gaming mouse, where it's just a 3x3 grid of selecting 1 through 9 on the keyboard. But yeah, we need more inputs, and they probably will want to try and lean into a touchscreen more. But I don't know how that's going to really work, or a touchpad if not a screen. We talked about the Meta Quest 3 announced alongside a Quest 2 price cut, so I've also reduced the price. BAFTA has announced format changes as entries for the 2024 Games Award. The organizer says it wants to level the awards playing field for all entrants. Eligibility criteria, voting rules, and key dates for the BAFTA have been announced. One of the things that people are kind of irate with is the Oscars diversity initiatives. If the Oscars really mattered, I think more people would be upset with that. Honestly, personally, I think the diversity initiatives are necessary. I won't say good, but I think they're necessary because there is just a lack of diversity, and frankly just a lack of variety of the people who are working behind this camera and in front of the camera in general. But I imagine that's not what the BAFTA is concerned about, because being British, their push towards diversity will be a little less because there's less diversity in the UK in the first place. Let's see what the actual changes. This may really just be a lot of changing names. There. For the first time, BAFTA will publicly reveal the full long list of games on December 14th, following the first round of member voting. Previously, only the shortlisted nominees were announced. That's adding transparency. What else are they changing? They're saying they trust in their voting members. I'm trying to skim through this fairly quickly. I'm not doing a good job of it. They're one of the, let's see, The best game and British game prizes have previously been decided by industry professionals. This year they'll be voted on by all BAFTA game members, of which there are over 1,000. So, people who were winning BAFTAs up until this point were being voted on by very small groups when they're saying industry professionals. Potentially one person picking who was winning, as little as one person. And so now they're having a more public vote of their members, not that public of a vote. But all the other awards are still being voted by industry juries, is what they're calling. The original property award has been renamed the New Intellectual Property to better communicate the category's purpose, which I guess that means if it's based off of a book or something, it wouldn't count. Or if it was a remake. That seems to me like that's the only real changes that are being made, though, is that 2 of the awards are now being voted on by the entire BAFTAs, and they've changed one of the titles, which is not much of a change. So let's move on. Apparently, Redfall developers reportedly had hoped it would have been cancelled or rebooted by Microsoft. The Bethesda project is said to have suffered from unclear direction and staffing issues. And I guess the number one thing to learn from Redfall is that Microsoft is a game publisher as much as any other game publisher, and they will just shove out garbage games and try and make as little of a loss of a game as possible. I can't imagine how Microsoft, though, would have done anything different. If Microsoft said, we're just going to cancel this game straight out, they run into problems with like the game Sea of Thieves, which is still long in development. And people would ask, certainly shareholders might ask, why, if you canceled Redfall, why didn't you just cancel Sea of Thieves too? Or any number of other projects. And Microsoft's not going to throw good money after bad, so the rebooted idea doesn't make any sense for a game that hasn't even established itself. So yeah, Microsoft did what it needed to do by shoving it out as a publisher. And honestly, since they have Game Pass as an option, shoving out a game for free, even if it's a bad game, makes a lot more sense than not putting it out. And even for historical reason, it's probably better to put out a bad game if you can than it is to just have it disappear into the ether and never be spoken of again. But yeah, you really couldn't have. I can't see that they would have done anything else other than just throw a ton of money at it. And honestly, if Microsoft's going to throw a ton of money at the development of something, it definitely should be Starfield or the next Elder Scrolls game, or even Fallout games. That makes a lot more sense. In a lot of ways, this might be a great way for Microsoft just to blame ZeniMax. And even though ZeniMax really isn't taking much of the blame here for Redfall, they probably should just blame ZeniMax and lay off people at ZeniMax in the management roles, which would save them more money in the long run anyways. It might very well be a Game of Thrones style political intrigue scenario where they let Redfall come out and be a bad game so they could fire at least one person at ZeniMax, one manager. And we have yet to hear that any managers at ZeniMax have left or been fired, but I wouldn't be surprised if the pressure is on. Apparently, a rare Mega Drive game has sold for nearly $10,000. Lakers versus Celtics is common in North America, but in Europe it's extremely rare. So is this the PAL copy? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, $10,000 doesn't seem that extremely high for a collectible. Um, but yeah, I definitely have seen some video games, very common video games, getting tried to be sold or getting rated at very high prices, particularly by WATA. The Kirby support studio Vanpool is closed. I think we had already talked about that. We already talked about that. We already talked about that. Apparently, a World of Warcraft writer claims that Blizzard fired him after he added a corporate greed joke. The dialogue in question was reportedly in the game for a week until someone very high saw it. In particular, this joke was being spoken by a loot goblin character who is of a whole group of people, as far as loot goblins, that were built around being greedy and or satirizing the idea of corporate greed. So it was very much in character and in line with the character. Of course, this is just one person's assumption, and maybe it's true and maybe it isn't. Yeah, undoubtedly, people in companies, managers have huge egos and think they are gods, basically, and so anyone who would even be perceived as making fun of them may very well get fired unceremoniously. Does he have a case for unfair layoff? Probably not. Not in the United States. But yeah, it definitely seems like this guy was really just doing his job and got fired by somebody who got butthurt from his perspective. It unfortunately is always the case that most of management's job is to make up a bunch of basic lies about their employees to document excuses to fire them. So, yeah, I'm sure Activision Blizzard probably has a long list of things that they'll claim he did that would justify laying him off, or they'll just lean back on the extremely lax anti-worker laws in the United States and say, well, it was an at-will job. And it definitely is within Blizzard's best interest just not say anything at all about this, and we're probably never going to get any kind of follow-up on this. Yeah. But it definitely feels like if the story is true, he was doing his job as he had been instructed, and that is definitely unfair. Speaking of Blizzard, though, the details of Diablo 4's first post-launch update have come out. A hotfix includes adjustments to the sorcerer and rogues classes and increases enemy health. I have seen some reviews of Diablo 4 and people are definitely loving it, although there are some problems that I also heard about it. First of all, the scaling sounds to be a nightmare, so you can never be overpowered, really. And the RPG mechanics in the game seem to be somewhat simplified and bone dead as far as logical choices. Like, one of the characters summons minions to attack him, so he has like 12 different skills that you would have to upgrade your minions. Otherwise, you really couldn't play that character, so they're not as optional as they really should be. And there is actually very little procedural generation in the game as far as going into a dungeon and getting a procedurally generated cave or dungeon. And where it does happen, the procedural generation, I don't think I heard in the review I heard, was not really that good. So some of the best qualities of previous Diablo games are kind of missing here. But ignoring that, it still seems like the game is incredibly good. The biggest danger still by far is that every single person who has reviewed Diablo 4 at this point did it on their own, like, custom character without the storefront and shop being open. So they were given a character build, they were running on different servers. Most of them probably didn't make it to the end game section at all because they only had like a week to play. So there is a possibility that the end game section is really bad and none of the reviewers saw it, and there's a very good possibility that there might be something at some future point or at launch in the storefront that is just full of microtransactions or pay to win elements, or just really expensive skins and things to purchase. So there is still a lot of room for Diablo 4 to be bad, even though every reviewer is giving it good reviews, which just mostly boils down to you shouldn't listen to reviewers and mainstream video game journalists review games. You should listen to people who have to actually play the game after the launch date, and you shouldn't pre-order, and you probably shouldn't play a game on day one. Like, I'd really love to see it become the standard that a game launches and then very few people actually play it on that first week of its launch, and everybody just waits until they have a trusted reviewer that they believe in to give them the advice as to whether to buy a game or play it. We already talked about Stranger Things closing down. Gamatsu says Escape Academy DLC Escape from the Past launches on June 19th. And then Samurai Showdown rollback netcode update has been delayed to late summer. And then that's going to get me on the mess of my macro here. So we have a game here called Genie from April 7th on the fall list, which that would have been about a month ago. Then we have a game called Pin Builder, which this is like a simulation of actually building a pinball table, which is an interesting idea, so I'm going to follow that. And then immediately we have an adult game, Horus Monster Slayer and Lover of Mini. It is tagged as an RPG visual novel. There is quite a variety of very nice looking fantasy realistic style CGI ladies. It does actually seem like you kind of click around to go from place to place to interact and talk to people, and it does seem like you have an actual health bar, so you are fighting quite a bit, I think, too, in an actual RPG. So $10.67 English only on it. That's intriguing. That being said, I guess I have to put this on the follow list. We are getting very much to the case where there's just going to be a lot of adult games on the following list. This game Myth just looks like a horror game. Same with the Soul Labyrinth. These games that we're looking at today are potentially going to be older games that we may have already looked at, but they may potentially also be games that we missed. And there will never be a full I'm going to say no to this. It's not varied enough. We'll never really know if I missed some games or not. Here we have an attempt at a half Street Fighter, half Mortal Kombat game. This is probably bad. Should I make a YouTube short around something like this, though? I don't know. One of the things I also saw, and I'll have to investigate this, is that I think we'll say no to anything like this. if you have free in your name as a sales point, we're pretty much admitting your game is not that interesting. I think it's IGN was doing a series on YouTube, 5 games you may have missed on Steam, and then they put out the last 5 games you may have missed on Steam, which I don't know if that means that they're stopping permanently or maybe they're deciding to stop as we're getting closer to the summer and we're actually going to have announcements of bigger games to focus and talk about. It would be weird to have a series that you started and stopped every year for half a year. I imagine there are some podcasts though that work that way too, where they start and stop. So here we have a game called Friday, which is weird because it's clearly trying to do Wednesday Addams. Wednesday's child is filled with woe, is the poem that they mention in the Wednesday Netflix series. And outside of that, it just doesn't look like there's much of a game here. So you have somebody here thinking that Wednesday Addams would have, I guess, been a much bigger thing and thought they could do some name confusion. In all fairness, you could just call it Wednesday. Like, a goth girl named Wednesday is probably not something that could be copyrighted anyways. As long as you don't say Wednesday Addams, I think the Wednesday and Addams would potentially get you in hot water. Come on. My middle mouse button click there did not want to work. Wizard's Watch doesn't look like anything. If you were going to try and make an Addams Family game, I think you probably would not want to actually play as any member of the Addams Family. I'm going to say no to this game because these airy games flood Steam you get a new one every couple of weeks. Not a crazy amount of releases, but just far too many. Drift Rain looks like it might be something. Yeah, it almost certainly Maniac Mansion was inspired by the Addams Family, so it would make a lot of sense to have a game like Maniac Mansion at a certain level, in that you're interacting with and dealing with a weird Addams family in the Addams Family house. But you might want to make it more of a visual novel or point and click adventure and not a 3D game. I think the amount of like physical action you've seen in different versions of Addams Family is just not high enough that it would be iconic for Wednesday Addams to run and jump or shoot guns or things like that. So it definitely is more of a narrative story. A detective, the Wednesday Addams Netflix series was really kind of a murder mystery detective story, and so I would follow that movement and make a point and click murder mystery type story. This game of Stride looks interesting, but unfortunately it's already mixed, so I'm just going to have to assume that it is really, really poor. It is in early access. I guess what I can do is put this on the follow list and then check back on it later. We're still looking for good horse games. At least one good horse game. And then if you have a game called I'm a Cowboy Western Shooter, it's such a generic name, I have to just dismiss it. So that's what I'll do. We have a hidden object game. I'll make a YouTube short around that. I actually don't get that many hidden object games anymore, so definitely makes sense. You have a game here called Beautiful Summer, which looks like it's an RPG maker game, potentially implying that there might be some adult content, but doesn't actually say any of that. It's just a low effort thumbnail. Another Backrooms game. There almost certainly at this point is some kind of AI visual screenshot scanner that would spit out this game looks like garbage as a response that I'm sure Valve could work on developing, because if you look at a thumbnail and it looks generic or poorly made, if you're looking at screenshots and they look poorly made, then there is definitely room for further human investigation at that point. I guess I'll put this on the follow list. You wouldn't want to just dismiss something because it's one or two colors, but I could see this game getting a second look by a human just because of its visuals. And certainly you could do a thing here where if they try to upload a low resolution image, you let them upload that low res image, something below like 1080p for the screenshots, and the something below potentially what would you go with, 720p for the thumbnails. If you have a resolution anywhere below that, then that alone should be a red flag to say, hey, they didn't even bother to give us good visuals. This is a weird looking game, but I'm not willing to immediately dismiss it, so I'll give it a chance. Crossing damaged bridges. Don't cross damaged bridges, obviously. Stay out of the farm. Yeah, you'd think that an AI could say, hey, wait a minute, this is really low polygon 3D visuals, maybe we should check that more. Here we have yet another adult game, MILFs of Sunville Season 1. I feel like there was another game that was MILFs of something Season 1. But these screenshots look different. If anything, these screenshots are fairly disappointing because they are all YouTube family friendly. What is going on here? There's a video here of full-on sexual activity, but every single screenshot is just people and butts. There's a real fetish around butts, certainly, but everything's been censored. Interesting. This game is rated very positively, and it's still in the adult section. It's $8.49. English, German, Russian, French, and Ukrainian is the first few languages. I just don't get it. There's full-on nudity in the description. In total, MILFs of Sunville Season 1 can boast more than 12,000 pictures, 270 animated clips, and 25,000 lines of dialogue, which is actually an incredibly low amount of dialogue, but whatever, it's an adult game. Are we potentially at a point now where Valve is coming back to these publishers and telling them to clean up their screenshots? Or are we hitting a point now where adult games have realized that they're giving away too much free content with the screenshots? These are the 3D CGI girls with fairly realistic color palettes, natural color palettes. Next game we have is called Rune Shroom. Rune Shroom. It looks interesting. You'll stay here forever. Doesn't look like anything. Mirage doesn't look like anything. Next we have another adult game, Furry MILF, which this is anthropomorphic animal furries, furry ladies in particular, in single gravure style pictures in all the screenshots. If that's your thing, it's $1.79, English only. Not terrible, but I would question how many pictures you're actually going to get. And apparently it's a 2D puzzle game, but every single screenshot is just the nudity. There's not a single screenshot showing any 2D puzzling going on here. I assume it's just a generic slide puzzle game. Let's see. Fruit Pro VR Fruit Punch looks like nothing. Project Proxima looks like nothing. Gym Tomb might be something, but it is also from the follow list. We just naturally transitioned into the follow list. Let's see, the last one here was June 2nd, and that's why we definitely need the dividers in the macro to work. Otherwise I would have just said, oh well, this looks interesting enough, and made a YouTube short around it. This next one, as we're going through the GMGs, we have a Gym Wizards Tactics game. It is 84% positive, $14.99. It's been as low as $2.99. I'll put it on the wish list. It's not particularly the most interesting looking style of games to me, but whatever. And then Gym Deeps, we have to say no to. Gully Breakdance, we have to say no to. And then Judonia, classic open world RPG game. It's very positive, this game is, but honestly I just don't think I'd want to play it. So I think I have to make an executive decision here and just say, look, I'm gonna play maybe the next Skyrim Elder Scrolls games, big games that lots of people would play, or a Zelda game, if I so chose, but I'm not gonna play just a generic fantasy RPG game. And if I was, let's be honest, I would lean more towards a Japanese fantasy RPG game, which has probably more relevancy than this would. Gear Shifters, looks like it is a car combat game. Car-based shoot 'em up. That's an interesting idea, so I'll put that on the wish list. Gear Club Unlimited 2 Ultimate Edition. Yeah, it looks like a decent enough racing game to say yes to. I don't know how many racing games I really need to buy. Gav Gav Odyssey came out in January, so I probably should say no to it, but I'll be generous and leave it on the follow list. Gatekeeper Eclipse is a fast-paced roguelike shooter. It's a prologue version of the game Gatekeeper. You see a Gatekeeper Eclipse and a Gatekeeper Infinity. Let's check. Gatekeeper Eclipse, February 27th, 2023. I don't see anything else labeled Gatekeeper. So this must be still in development. And really, this is a prologue game. So I think I'm going to take this off the follow list because obviously I didn't realize that it was just basically a demo. Godzilla. Let's see. Godzilla's Wakened. And you were breaking buildings. I am very interested in a building beat 'em up game. That being said, this doesn't quite scratch that itch. So I'm going to take that off. So now we're back to Komatsu articles. Like I said, we're going to be all over the place today. Skatebird is now available for the PS4 and PS5. It was previously released for Xbox, Switch, PC, and Lua. Let's see, Skatebird is out. I suppose at this point, I was thinking that I would make YouTube Shorts when a new version of a game is released on a different console. It would have some slight relevancy to say, hey, this just came out on PlayStation 4, but remember it also is available on Steam. But that really, I already have way too many YouTube Shorts getting made anyways. So updates to the game, yes, get you a new YouTube Short, particularly a new trailer. Getting released on a new console, no. A game called Slavpunk Oldtimers launches June 28th. It is a isometric shooter. Let's see what it looks like on Steam. I wish I could procedurally program the tabs to close and move on when I'm going from a Komatsu article to a Steam article, but I don't know how I would do that. Bushido Road Games presentation has been set for July 27th. Here we can see a lot of Japanese games, most of which I can't read or recognize. Front Mission First Remake is coming to the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC on June 30th. We'll check that. Looks like it's an XCOM style game, so it doesn't particularly interest me that much. Corsairs Battle of the Caribbean has been announced for the PS5, PS4, Xbox Series, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. I guess at this point I should just say for everything. If only I had some kind of plugin that would take a list and then summarize that list. I'm going to say no to putting this on the fall list or making a YouTube short on it. It just isn't visually appealing enough. But yeah, whenever I saw the exact phrase PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, and Xbox One, whenever I see that, and PC, if I had some kind of plugin that saw that text and then re-summarized it and changed it to every console, that would be interesting. I may actually have a plugin installed that might do that. That'd save me a lot of breath, certainly. This Higurashi When They Cry Howl is coming out for the PS4 and Switch. It's well, the DLC for it is called Higurashi When They Cry Origin, being announced, due out June 22nd in Japan. If I recall correctly, the Higurashi When They Cry series is kind of this long-running JRPG or RPG Maker experience where people get trapped in this village, and then they all get murdered slowly and slowly, and then time resets and they do it again and again. And you're trying to figure out who the killer is or break the curse. Something like that. This series in particular had kind of a unique art style when it first started, but not that unique. It very much is in the line of what an early 90s anime would have looked like, and it was going for more of that moe style, or particularly what would have been known as moe in the 90s, and they've just stuck with that animation style, which over the years has drifted and evolved, so now their animation style seems fairly rough. Plus it's a visual novel, so they didn't want to try and spend a lot of energy reanimating everything. It's become somewhat iconic, I imagine, for the series. But yeah, it definitely comes off as a little soft and poorly drawn, even by 90s anime style. Yeah, a lot of times I say things are in the 90s too, and I forget that the 2000s and the 2010s also existed, or even the 2020s. I guess we're in 2020s now. Grand Blue Fantasy versus Rising Siegfried gameplay trailer and PS4 and PS5 online beta test set for mid-July. Check out this Gematsu article if you're interested. The Famitsu sales from the 22nd to the 28th have been updated. I guess this is Zelda in a different kind of outfit. You have Bustafellas Season 2 taking the number 3rd spot for the Switch. That feels like that is either a shoot 'em up game or a visual novel. And then you have Princess Arthur for the Switch taking the 15th spot, and Aki Ito and Oh Shiro HD Remaster on the 16th. You have Nintendo Switch games in general all the way till number 17, with Hogwarts Legacy for the PS4. Not a single PS5 on the list. Dranius number 20, Akana 4 Rhythms Across the Blue Extra number 21, Puzzle Bobble Everywhere number 23, and Batsugun Saturn Tribute Reloaded number 29. If anything, since there isn't really a big breakout hit game, I guess Bustafellas is the biggest breakout hit this week. It really goes to show how just having a lot of third-party developers in Japan in particular produce games and release games lets Nintendo Switch dominate in the sales market. And as long as Nintendo is dominating in the sales market of the software, then it's no surprise that hardware market would follow. And so we have consistent more sales for Switch OLED models than we do PlayStation 5s. I don't know if the PlayStation 5 has ever outsold the Switch. If it did it for like 1 week. But yeah, not a lot of new insights. Xbox still selling nothing in Japan. Switch selling really well. PlayStation 5 selling decently. PlayStation 4 not selling much at all these days. A point-and-click adventure game called Desolatium has been announced for everything. Consoles and PC would be the best way to phrase that. Yep. It looks like it's a very unique visual art style for a point-and-click horror game, which may help it quite a bit. That does intrigue me visually. A game called Scarf is coming to consoles, PS4s, PS5s, Xbox Series, and Xbox Ones on July 6th. Is it already on Steam? Yes. So we can see it came out in 2021. Not to be confused with Journey, even though visually it definitely looks a lot like Journey. Medic Quest 3 was announced. We already talked about that for as little as I cared. A game called Forever Skies launches in early access for PC on June 22nd. Let's see. I assume first-person apocalyptic survival game. That's what they describe it as. There might be something here, but it might very well be too early access and not really have any story or process to it. Spider-Man 2 map is roughly twice the size of the previous games, and the character switching has been detailed. You can see he's gliding / flying. Oculus Publishing and White Owls Incorporated announced Death Game Hotel for Quest 2 and Quest 3. At a certain point, though, I'm not willing to make YouTube shorts around anything that isn't on Steam. That's just my line because that's the macro. It couldn't handle a URL from a different storefront. So, we can't watch this trailer apparently because it's restricted. I imagine it doesn't show too much. There might be something interesting visually around this, but I guess it doesn't really matter too much. And yeah, I'm just not going to promote Quest 2 or Quest 3 games. That being said, anything on Steam is fair game to get a YouTube short, as far as I'm concerned. This was the studio that was founded by the Deadly Premonition creator Hidetaka Swery 65 Suhiro. So if this is inspired by Deadly Premonition, it could be pretty weird. That being said, I don't feel like Swery 65 is actually a particularly good game developer, so I hope there's some more talented people assisting him and just taking his crazy ideas, which it definitely seems like this game could have crazy ideas, and doing a better job at making it a good game. Like, the problem with Deadly Premonition is that it got decent coverage as a joke bad game, but then Deadly Premonition 2 repeated the joke and people were considerably less interested in Deadly Premonition 2 than Deadly Premonition 1 because of it. And he didn't really get that much better at making games between Deadly Premonition 1 or Deadly Premonition 2. Power Wash Simulator VR has been announced for Quest 2. Samba de Amigo has been announced for Quest 2. If anything, just having those 4 announcements so far, though, shows that there's more interest in making good announcements around the Quest 2 and Quest 3 launch than there were around the PlayStation VR 2, even though the Quest 2 and the PlayStation VR 2 are about the same price, although the Quest 3 and Quest 2 I don't think require anything else. I don't think you have to plug them into a computer or a PlayStation 5, but the PlayStation VR 2 has to be plugged into a PlayStation 5, so it's effectively double the price then. We already talked about the 7th Guest VR. Stranger Things VR launches this fall for Quest 2, which, yeah, we get the announcement that potentially 2 of the old VR Stranger Things games are eventually going to be abandoned, and now we get an announcement around a new Stranger Things game. Apparently you're playing as the bad guy in Stranger Things, which I don't know if you really want to play as the bad guy in a Stranger Things game. Yeah, and this just does feel like this is a horror experience. I'm in this weird position where I think there's no more Stranger Things for me to watch at the moment, but I also think they didn't wrap up the story. I think that's where we left off with Stranger Things, is that there's going to be one more season or one more half season to wrap everything up. And I don't know if wrapping everything up really is going to be that satisfactory. Honestly, Stranger Things 1 was about the only good season, so if you only watched the first season and then didn't watch any of the rest of it, you probably would have a better experience than watching the whole thing. They could change that with the last few episodes, but I bet it's going to be somewhat disappointing. People were obsessed with Stranger Things for a while there, but I don't think people care that much. And I think Netflix is probably wasting too much money making Stranger Things spin-off games, or even just overspending on the budget of Stranger Things as a TV show, when they should just be making other medium-sized TV shows also instead. Like, I don't know if Netflix needs one big tentpole TV production to hold everything up, or if they need 5 or 6 tentpoles that just cycle in and out of people's interest levels to maintain a general feel of Netflix being high quality content. Moving on, Attack on Titan VR and Breakable delayed to the winter. It has a first concept trailer. This is also a Quest game that apparently is in its announcement being delayed. Quest 2 and Quest Pro, not Quest 3. A Bulletstorm VR has been announced for PlayStation VR 2, PSVR, and Quest, which inherently this would be the third time Bulletstorm has been sold in the past decade or so. And that's a little weird. Also, you can see the publisher is People Can Fly, with the developer being Incuvo, when Bulletstorm was published in a remastered version by Gearbox. Let's see. Can we select the text of Bulletstorm? Here. Copy. Paste. Bulletstorm. Get rid of the publisher. Come on, get rid of the publisher. There we go. So yeah, you have a Bulletstorm full clip edition here that was developed by People Can Fly and published by Gearbox Publishing. And then people were upset that you got this remastered version, and they did nothing for the people who owned the previous version, which would arguably maybe be impossible to even find on Steam now. Yeah, the original version of Bulletstorm, which I do own, not even showing up on the list. Let's see. Sort by name. Only the full clip of it edition is showing up. Yeah, and it definitely didn't feel like that was a particularly fruitful or even good relationship. Gearbox Publishing in general, I just think, never was a good idea in the first place. Of course, it might not so much be a case that the breakdown was so much that Gearbox Publishing just really didn't support Bulletstorm and as well as it should. It might be a case that because Embracer Group has acquired Gearbox since then, that Embracer Group is just not interested in being the publisher of a Bulletstorm VR. So now People Can Fly has turned themselves into a publisher, but this is a different game that is being developed by the developer of this game, Green Hell, which that doesn't look terrible as a game, and it is a VR game, so they're not going in the wrong direction with their developer, really. And I guess it isn't incredibly crazy that you would switch publishers. What's more crazy by far is the desire to make Bulletstorm just a thing that succeeds. People Can Fly, I don't think, has anything else that they can sell, though, at this point. Hopefully they're in development of some other kind of game, but I assume, for the most part, that they don't have anything else that they own the rights to. Let's see, Assassin's Creed Nexus VR announced for the Quest 2 and Quest 3, which I have no idea what that would be, and they're really not telling you. So, it'd be kind of a weird Assassin's Creed game if you're in VR and you can't run and jump. So, I wouldn't be surprised if it is very, very far away from what you would expect from an Assassin's Creed game. Vampire the Masquerade Justice announced for the PSVR 2, Quest 2, and Quest 3. Yeah, the problem with anything with Vampire the Masquerade in front of it is that so many different games can have that title in front of it from different developers that there's really no quality behind the name. It is just the equivalent of saying Dungeons and Dragons Justice. In the Vampire the Masquerade is a rule set to live action roleplay as vampires, and Dungeons and Dragons is a rule set to roleplay as fantasy characters. We talked about Everybody Switch 1 2 being announced for the Switch, obviously. A game called White Album Memories Like Falling Snow is coming to PC in Q3 of 2023. This was a 2010 remake of a 1998 visual romance novel. So, I assume it is coming out on Steam for the first time and has been available on other PC websites. A boss rush co-op online action game called Trinity S is coming to the PS5 and PS4 this fall. Boss rush game. It's been kind of a long time since we've seen a boss rush game. Although, if the bosses are just fantasy monsters, I don't know if that's particularly that interesting. Although, in all fairness, I'd like a lot of JRPGs to have mods in them where you just boss rush the monsters very quickly. But that's not really what this is going to do. The idea of turning a JRPG into a boss rush game would really just make developers of JRPGs work harder, because the content in between the boss fights tend to be where you're developing the easiest low effort content. Just making open fields and having random spawning enemies, that's a lot less work than having a bespoke boss with a unique attack set and unique animations. Moving on, the King of Fighters 13 global match for PS4 open beta test set for June 5th to the 11th. A game called Zytris system trailers available. If you want to check that out, this is a turn-based RPG game. It's due out for the PS5, PS4, and Switch on June 29th in Japan. Dungeon Travelers 2 and Dungeons Travelers 2-2 for PC launches June 9th worldwide. I feel like we had already gotten the announcement of this game, but now we may have a full release date. Noticeably, though, I don't think we have them linking to a Steam page. Sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit over here. Yep. Again, I just feel like I'm losing momentum. It says launch for PC, maybe not launch for Steam. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth development progressing smoothly and according to plan, says the producer Yoshinori Katase. Then, so Edesco announces a publishing partnership with Among Giants. These are two companies that I don't know anything about. So Desco has announced a partnership with Sao Paulo, Brazil-based game developer Among Giants to publish its upcoming project. That's not very informative as far as news. Alan Wake 2 has behind the scenes introducing Saga Anderson. If you want to check out that video on Gametsu. And then this may be our last Gametsu article for today. Goodbye World for the PS4, PS5, Xbox Series, and Xbox One launches June 30th. This looks like this is a kind of RPG looking game, but it seems a little bit different visually. You can see it's very positive and it's already on my wish list. So it's coming out to more platforms. And that's going to move us into the GameDeveloper.com articles. Microsoft and the GLAD Alliance, I think is how you describe them, have partnered to improve LGBTQ+ representation in Xbox games. Xbox rings in Pride Month with a long-term commitment in building out its LGBTQ+ rep in its upcoming games. So, of the games Microsoft is making and of the games Microsoft has made in the past, who has been a poor representation or of LGBTQ+? Like we're not really getting back to just like really old games which might have had some stereotypes and stuff that is just completely inappropriate. Honestly, there's not even that many games like that. What is that? Custer's Last Stand, or for the Atari, that was offensive. Certainly, there has been a considerable lack of representation, so we may see more characters in Microsoft games that can, or by default in their narrative will be LGBTQ+. And like I said several weeks ago with the like forced lesbian relationship in the Horizon DLC that just came out, if you write the character from the beginning to have that tendency and have that be part of her I want to say culture, part of her backstory and her development, that's fine. But to just throw it in the last second so you could potentially easily cut it out if people are offended is just bad storytelling. And you can certainly start with a character who thinks they're straight, and then they, through a journey, develop a relationship and realize that they're they're not 100% straight, and they are more in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. That's fine too, as long as it's well written. In general, I will accept almost anything in a video game if it's well written, and I think most people would. But we have definitely seen in the past where it comes off as very tokenish, and that is the thing that you have to always avoid too, is that we're not just going to have the token gay in games going forward. We shouldn't have a token gay. But then when you also get down to who are the characters in Microsoft games, there aren't that many Microsoft games in the first place. Let's do this. I'm gonna see if I can see list of Microsoft published games. See if we can find something on Wikipedia here. So we can start by skipping anything for the trash 80, TRS 80 in 1979. But we can look at this to say, hey, here's what they would have been making a long time ago. Apparently Bill Gates made Donkey.Basic. That's a pretty old one. Chips Challenge, things like that. Gorillas, what would have been more Pipe Dream, Microsoft Golf. You have some flight simulator games early. I guess you could have more representation of LGBTQ plus pilots in Flight Simulator, but I don't think you show any pilots in Flight Simulator in the first place. Minesweeper. Let's see. Fury. Nope. You're just not running into games so far that would even have people in them. Full Court Press here. NBA Full Court Press from 1996. Maybe you make some gay basketball people, Gex. Yeah. The last thing you would want to do is come back to like a character like Gex and make him LGBTQ plus for no reason. You don't want to change. Goosebumps, probably not the best game there to potentially change. A lot of these also are not games that are being actively developed. Ages of Empires, sure. You could definitely heavily focus on the fact that there was a lot more acceptable gay style interactions in Roman and Greek times before the heavy homophobia that was introduced by very conservative Christian Catholic rule. Dilbert's Desktop Toys, probably not remaking that. Let's see. So we're getting into like 1999, and you can see the vast majority of what Microsoft would have published before really becoming Microsoft Xbox Studios is not stuff that would get remade. Crimson Skies, maybe a remake there might work. And if they could get the license on some of this stuff, it might make sense. Metal Gear Solid was apparently published at some point. Maybe there's some room there. Dead or Alive 3. Maybe you'd introduce a character to Halo. I guess maybe there's some room for more characters in the Halo universe. They could be LGBTQ+. There aren't that many characters in the Halo universe in the first place, though. It's just a long list of Microsoft games that are nothing. And then we know they own Double Fine, and so of the Double Fine games, You could probably add a couple of characters there or make new games from Double Fine. We know they own ZeniMax, so in the Doom games and the Fallout games, like you could already pretty much, I think, be gay in the Fallout games. Nude Natural Ultimate Digital Experiment. Interesting name. Like Prey. You start to think about some of the ZeniMax other published games, the Doom reboots. Like, I think you could make an argument that Doom Guy is asexual because he seems very much to only care about killing Doom monsters and a little bunny character, so he might weirdly be in love with the bunny and have a weird fetish there, which, like, that would be poor representation according to the Glad Alliance, I'm sure, is if they came out and said the Doom Guy is in a deep like romantic infatuation with his pet bunny. This Sudiki might be an example of where we started to get into the Xbox era, and Xbox was definitely the edgelord early 2000s focus. So as we go down this direction, you start to get into fairly heteronormative representations, heavily sexualized characters. Yeah, Jade Empire. You look at the cover of that, and that's heteronormative. Conquer Live and Reloaded probably has some offensive things in it. Dungeon Siege. It's probably fairly heteronormative. Fable games. I don't know if you could be gay in the Fable games. Probably could. Perfect Dark Zero. Yeah. They really don't have that many characters though. Gears of War characters are very heteronormative. Crackdown characters are fairly heteronormative. So yeah, I think it mostly does boil down to they just don't show any LGBTQ plus characters. But in 2007, it's not super surprising that they wouldn't either. You do have to look at all these older games from that direction too. So I'm hoping that this commitment, if it means anything, is a commitment to creating new well-written characters and not a commitment for tokenism or just allowing the most insane SJWs in your company to ruin entire games by shoving too much of that in the face of people. On a day-to-day basis, you shouldn't really be asking or determining in your own opinion whether the people you're dealing with are gay or LGBTQ plus in any way, or whether they're straight or not. It's just not usually that important. And in most video games, there's usually an enemy shooting at you, so who cares? But you also don't want them to break realism in the other direction and have a military first-person shooter set in World War One and then have a like cyborg lesbian as the most important character in the story. Mass Effect did let you be gay with some of the characters. Mass Effect actually is probably a great example of where it is a little poorly written and designed, in that some characters say yes and some characters say no, which is maybe in line with what the real world would be like, and that some people would be open to a gay relationship or or an LGBTQIA type of relationship. I wish I knew a better phrase there, but some people wouldn't. But in a fantasy fulfillment example, in a role-playing game, you probably would want every character to say yes and be into it. You definitely don't want to go back and say Rocky and Bullwinkle were secretly gay partners. I mean, it's a funny argument to make, certainly, but you don't want to canonize that and ruin people's nostalgia. Or Braid is kind of an interesting example. You can't make the main character Braid gay because that would ruin the story. Two humans never coming back as an option. You wouldn't want to make Banjo-Kazooie a gay couple. And I'm saying gay a lot here, but it could be any kind of relationship. A lot of games where characters are the only character you see or play with. Let's see. So we're up to 2010 now, and still really not a lot of characters that you would make new games from. You could maybe make a Miss Explosion Man 2 and do something with that. You could, the Worms game, like all the worms, like real world worms, are depicted as being kind of masculine male characters. There's definitely room for better representation there, where half the characters could be female and several of them could be leaning towards being gay or otherwise. Alan Wake's an American Nightmare. They probably don't have control of the Alan Wake series anymore. You really can't do anything with like South Park games. South Park is going to be South Park and should be South Park. Can't really do anything with Fez. Spelunky lets you play as several different characters. Let's see. If anything, this is really just a reaffirming of the vast amount of games Microsoft either acquired or has released and failed to make continuing series from. They just kind of give up around games fairly quickly, so, instead of bringing them back or making remakes or making sequels. I guess there's a lot of games here that if they still completely own the rights to, they could remake. A lot of these I think they just published. So in a lot of ways this is also just the general problem with that idea around video games in general, is that you have just a lot of games where it's not that many people, or that it would ruin the established narrative to change the people. Gears of War in particular, though, I think you could change pretty easily. You could add a new character that is LGBTQ plus easily. There is also an argument around percentage there, that should it be 20 to 30%, which sounds about right to me as far as people who would be LGBTQ plus, and with half of the people being identifiable as male and half being identifiable as female, or should it be in people's minds? And I'm not sure if a lot of SJWs don't feel like it should be 60, 70, or 100% of everybody in the story is LGBTQ plus, which is too much for a lot of people. Which I probably would include myself in that. Like, unless they want to make a game based off of like that Netflix TV show Q Force that got canceled after the first season. I actually thought that was a funny kind of joke on it. Here's a big problem as we're getting to the 2020s. If Microsoft owns Minecraft, no way they can add any LGBTQ plus content there. Not really, not without a huge backlash. There's been massive backlashes against everybody pre-Pride Month. I don't know how big these backlashes actually are going to be enforced and how many people are really going to boycott anything. But even Chick-fil-A, which was very much beloved by conservative Christians in the United States, has caused some backlash by just saying they have updated their diversity and inclusiveness policy to say we recognize and accept gay people and people of different races, black people basically. They didn't even come out with like a pride cup or any kind of pride colors or anything like that. They just put out a press release saying we've updated our diversity and inclusivity. And certainly at that point, if your backlash is against the company just because they are accepting people and trying to be inclusive, then I think you've gone very, very far. I mean, even Jesus is about accepting people, the sinners and the unwashed, dirty masses and the poor. Like, I'm going on a side rant here. I think Tell Me Why was all around a LGBT person. At least one of those characters I think was LGBT. Gears 5 changes who the main protagonist is into a female character, so they've already made a step that direction. Psychonauts 2 is based still around the main character, so you can't really do too much around that, and I wouldn't really want them to. I don't know what the story around As Dusk Falls is. Grounded as a game in general, I kind of wanted that to succeed more. Like a remake of GoldenEye 007, you can't change too much there. It'd be very weird to make James Bond gay. Minecraft Legends, can't do anything there. Forza Motorsports, you really can't do too much there. Like, I think it's fairly reasonable to say any game before the 2000s shouldn't really be looked at by that by the same standards as 2000s games. And when you narrow it down to that level, there really aren't just that many games published by Microsoft in the first place. We do have some to be announced games in the Forza Motorsport and Ara, History Untold, Ages of Empires 4, Valed, Everwild, Fable, Perfect Dark, Project Mare, Sinuous Saga, Hellblade 2. Sinuous Saga is neurodivergent, at the very least. Senua is. But I think otherwise she's heteronormative. Outer Worlds 2, State of Decay 3. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I guess it's easy for Microsoft to make that promise because they really haven't done it too terribly. I don't know anybody that's really done it too terribly. If anything, the poorest representation, in my opinion, has been the Saints Row reboot. So, yeah. These long-term commitments are not binding by any means. Amazon Game Studios Publishing will be collaborating with queer media advocacy organization and amplifying existing resources through workshops and consulting to bring genuine, heartfelt, and aspirational LGBTQIA plus representation. All that one sentence sounds as good as it's going to sound, frankly. And I will just have to wait to see if it actually changes or causes any actions to be taken. Let's see. Ubisoft has appointed a veteran managing directors for their Toronto and Montpelier studios. Which, okay. Check out that article on GameDeveloper.com if you care. Then we already talked about EA reportedly cutting jobs and canceling games at Fire Monkeys. We already talked about the CWA rescinding 3 unfair labor practice charges. The game Telltale's Strong Bad's games have been pulled from Steam after the license expired. I played this game. I have my coverage on YouTube of me covering this game. It may not be the best coverage ever. I wouldn't inherently want to go back and play it a second time. I know there was definitely at least one person that really enjoyed my footage around the Strong Bad game and had a lot more of familiarity around Strong Bad as a series. It doesn't really have a lot of relevancy. A webtoon character in Strong Bad from a long time ago that you probably can't watch the webtoons anywhere very easily either. And now the Telltale company and license has it disappearing. If Strong Bad came back and was published by a different publisher, that really wouldn't inspire too many people to play the game again. If they made a remaster of it, I don't think that would inspire too many people either. I feel like Strong Bad is just going to fall into the ether of history, and it's probably fine that it does. As for people that did want to play this game, now that it is effectively abandonware, I think you're even more justified to go and find a pirated copy of these games if you want to. I don't think the games are really worth finding and playing, though, in my opinion. But it does definitely go to show that you either own it on your hard drive digitally, or you own it on a disc, or you don't own it at all. Because if it's up in the cloud, at any point it could disappear, at least for being available for purchase. I think people who already own the game can re-download it. The other problem here certainly is that this is probably a game that would become a little bit less easy to install as you move towards a potential Windows 11, or there is talk of a Windows 12. For the first time in decades, there is also a small possibility, and I'm going to throw this out, of a major change around Windows 12 and computers and PCs in general. Intel is proposing the i86S line of instruction sets and codes, which would eliminate all 8-bit and 12-bit and I think 16-bit instructions, which would allow them to make smaller CPUs or put modern chips in the space where the chips are for that. Mostly, that would mean you're going to either have to run some kind of emulation to run older games if that became the standard, and that everybody was just using a 86S style chip. Right now we're using a AMD 8664 or something like that. 686-64. I don't even know what it is. But right now we've been using the AMD 64-bit instruction set for PC gaming for decades now, and there really is no reason to go to a 128 instruction set at the moment or in the near future. If they did go to the 86-S instruction set, they would have to figure out a way to make the computers boot up, because there is literally no code in the instruction sets at the moment to boot directly into a 64-bit mode. It instead boots into an 8-bit mode, then it goes to a 12 mode, and then it goes to a 16-bit. I'm not sure it even goes to a 12 mode, come to think of it. But it has to effectively go through several stages of how the CPU is before it gets to the 64-bit mode that Windows 10 uses. The other thing is that there is a possibility, it's probably not a high possibility, that Windows 12 might heavily target ARM computers, the reduced instruction set code of a ARM CPU instead, which would be completely different instructions and would require all software to be recompiled and rebuilt from the ground up. If they heavily pushed for a Windows 12 on ARM, they have made efforts for Windows 10 on ARM, Windows 11 on ARM. But if they pushed more and more people to Windows 12 on ARM, that would get rid of a lot of legacy software that nobody is supporting, and it would be a clean, fresh start. Which I don't know if anybody ever would actually accept a clean, fresh start on Windows, where none of your old software could install or work at all, and you had to just get new software. It would have to be a massive amount of free software, frankly, to justify that, or you'd have to be completely new to PCs and not have any legacy software that you care to run, or old games that you'd want to play. But those are just two small possibilities that something big might happen, when in reality the much better bet is that nothing big will happen, and there'll be insignificant minimal changes between like Windows 11 and Windows 12. Let's see. VideoGameDeveloper.com has an article here. Third annual Queer Games Bundle highlights queer devs in 2023. All proceeds from the pro community and anti competition Queer Games Bundle will go to the developers of the highlighted games featured inside. This is a itch.io bundle. Let's see. So because it's on itch.io, there's just a considerably large difference as far as what kind of games and the quality of these games are. Scrolling down through this, I don't recognize any of these games at all. Yeah. Lady Killer in a Bind. I do recognize that one. But the vast majority of these itch.io games, I assume, are very short, very simplistic games. You can see by the animation style that there's just a lack of real polish. These are very likely indie games developed by one person, and very, very likely to be so centered around their one focus and one narrative that there won't be much of a game there at all. It does seem like the bundle is pretty big, but they want you to spend $60 for a bunch of games that I wouldn't even spend a penny on and really would expect to be free. So it kind of comes down to a situation where it just doesn't matter how many games you give me when I don't value any of them just based on first impressions of their thumbnails. You'd think that the biggest sellers would be at the top and I wouldn't have to scroll all the way down here to find something that might catch me. You do kind of run into a problem here in that some of these clearly are adult games, which, yeah, there is a question certainly on representation and how your community wants to be represented. It is the whole, should there be kink at pride parades, or should there be families and kids walking around at pride parades? Arguably, maybe there should be two types of pride parades, and some of them are like should be leather daddies in kink outfits and ball gags and things like that, and some of them should be family friendly events. That would make the most sense, but both should be well defined and described and warned. So yeah, that's a massive amount of games on that bundle, but none of them look interesting. And obviously this is also because of Pride Month. And we already had talked about this, and I guess the one thing I didn't do is say shame on Valve in general. Even if it is just like one employee and we're trying to blame just one employee at Valve, it doesn't matter. The fact that Valve would potentially have an employee who could get away with contacting through a lawyer Nintendo, the fact that there isn't any strong leadership there to say no, these kinds of decisions have to go through me and I'm going to stand up and take credit and responsibility of this decision is a problem. The fact that Valve wouldn't come back and fire an employee for misappropriating their resources and having a lawyer who is almost certainly billing Valve by the hour contact Nintendo. Yeah. It is a failure systematically that this kind of bad faith dealing could be done and would be done. The fact that Valve even has a culture where somebody felt it acceptable to interfere with the publish of the release of a game is crazy. Alright, moving on. So yeah, here's the list of new games that had come out, and let's see. So we've got some more new games to look at, although these may be really just games we already looked at, and there's only about 10 of them. Anyways, it's not a fall list cleanup though. It's just that I ran the macro a few times, I think, trying to get it to work. And I am going to have to run it a few more times trying to get it to work in the weekend. And yeah, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a particularly relaxing weekend for me, as I clearly need to play some more Yu-Gi-Oh! And is this a fall list game? And I need to play more Indiana Jones. And I need to work on the macro. This pile-up game caught my attention earlier, so I'm going to give that a follow. Zombie Ants doesn't look interesting. BT Harmony looks weird, but I'll give it a chance. And then that looks like nothing. What is this next tab? No, that's just a open tab in general. Okay. So let me just clean up the rest of this. Here's the end of show article that I had set up for the end of show. We are basically at the end of show at this point. I guess in general I am looking for feedback on the interstitial titles, but if nobody has anything to say with them, I guess I'm just going to have to assume that they're acceptable enough at least. Yeah, seems like the macro crashed multiple times at the same place, so yeah. So there wasn't anything new to cover. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me even further, there's a bunch of links down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.